You may have been living under a rock if you didn't know that Cyberpunk 2077 launched in a disappointing state, to put it mildly. Game-breaking bugs and expectations not quite met after marketing drove the hype train for this game for over 7 years. Now, after a year and numerous patches later, is the game finally that what it was promised? Hey guys, Jehuty here, and I just played Cyberpunk 2077, a Jehuty Gaming review. Now, I decided to give this game a shot because you can pick it up for quite cheap nowadays, and I realized that many newer reviews just stick to the PC version. So I mainly played on PS4 Pro, but also tried the game on PC, PS5, and a base PS4. So without further ado, please enjoy my review. Well, before we get into the meat of things with the review, a lot of people would like to know if the game is actually playable in its current state. At launch, this game was, well, buggy, but to such a degree that buggy is an understatement. We're talking about cars suddenly exploding, people's characters being catapulted into the sky, sudden T-poses, enemy eye just stopping mid-firefights. You get the gist. So as of this version being 1.33, there are still some bugs, as you can see in the footage, but man, have we come a long way. I didn't have any of the major issues mentioned before, but there's still a bit of jank going on. I had an instance where I had to restart the game. I also had an instance where a weird facial clipping happened that was gone after I reloaded my save. There was also an issue with my car vanishing after I parked it and got out. But overall, nothing game breaking. But the next issues were a bit more immersion shattering. On last gen consoles, your main problem is going to be assets loading in. This is much better than at launch, most likely due to some memory optimization done. However, I don't see this going away entirely, being a limit to the 5400 RPM hard drives those old consoles have. Additionally, there's also the occasional problem of buildings further away not loading in properly. And for this, I would have preferred that they just went with lower quality assets for the distance instead of, well, occasionally just loading in nothing at all. See for yourselves. One issue that also occasionally reared its head are audio files, like conversation dialogue, coming out late or in one instance not at all.
Fucking sucker scums everywhere.
Hey, I was listening to that.
Shut up.
This mostly happened when I got a call whilst driving fast or when the game did an autosave. Most likely it's related to, once again, assets streaming in. So if you ask me, the game is in a playable state. Doesn't matter what platform you choose, you will come across some problems though. On a decent PC or current gen consoles, you will have far less issues, especially pertaining to assets streaming in. But if you have no choice, then playing it on a last gen console is definitely a possibility in its current state. Welcome to Night City. You take up the mantle of V, the character you play as. Without spoiling too much, you take on a mission that goes horribly wrong, and you now have Johnny Silverhand in your head. His goal is to take down one of the major corporations in this universe, named Arasaka. Some may say he's very douchey, but to me he fits in just fine in this world, as you're always second guessing everyone's intentions. So just like in real life, there's a whole lot of grey areas in between, if you catch my drift.
You're a dick, you know?
And you're a cunt. Maybe we'll fit together after all.
So naturally, it's not just you, but the people you meet along the way. I found that most characters I came across during the main story were written compellingly. Judy, Victor, and Panam were definitely my favorites. There are also romance options if you're into that kind of thing. I also like that V isn't just a silent protagonist, but actively participates in conversations, given that you made the character. One thing I also like is that the optional world building lore is scattered across the world. Be it the news and the radio, tidbits people are talking about on the streets, or emails, to name a few, detailing private stuff or happenings that are affecting the world around you. Speaking of which, your choices mostly just give you the illusion of choice, but don't really affect the story in any meaningful way, especially the last portion of the game. You have different life paths at the beginning, Nomad, Street Kid, or Corpo. However, that only matters for the first hour or so. Regardless, all paths end up converging into the same mission, and from there things are largely the same for all. No matter what, you meet Johnny in the same way, and that can be said about most of the game. If anything, in certain conversations you have the option of additional dialogue based on your life path, but honestly it's quite insignificant. Your choices during main missions also have no bearing whatsoever on the endings. If you want to have more than the option of just the base ending, then I recommend doing side quests, especially those tailored to your companions that you come across. It's definitely no Mass Effect, but on a personal level I don't mind. It's just that the marketing for the game may have given you that impression, especially if you played one of CD Projekt Red's Witcher games. Upon booting up the game, you're greeted to a character creator, which is quite robust honestly. I created the female version of V from the initial E3 gameplay demo. Honestly, I don't get why there is a character creator, since outside of some cutscenes with reflections and the occasional mirror, you don't see your own character. Now the other thing that initially disturbed me was when the game was announced, the first person view. After spending time with the game, I can clearly say that the perspective grew on me more and more, and I realized that the game was well designed around this. To the point that I can also say it adds to the immersion, something I normally hear as marketing buzzwords, but here I actually mean it. Now to the way Cyberpunk actually plays. Don't get things twisted here. If you're expecting future Call of Duty meets GTA, this isn't it. This is still a role-playing game in the vein of The Witcher 3. It's different logically, given there's a different setting and weapons, which also allows me now to talk about the gunplay. Shooting feels surprisingly good. It's weighty, so don't go in expecting a twitch shooter. You have your more traditional weapons, being newer weapons of assault rifles, pistols, submachine guns, and the likes, but there are also the so-called power weapons that are more futuristic. You hold down the trigger and then delayed after a small charge, energy bullets are fired. I found these very interesting, but I went back to more today feeling weapons. I guess old habits die hard. Melee is also an option if you want to get in close and personal, but I advise you use a dedicated weapon for that, such as a katana blade. The game gives you a very linear path in the beginning. That coupled with the very limited ways of making money at first, deterred me from experimenting with playstyles and spending points on enhancements. It was to such an extent honestly that I waited for a while before I started investing my points into my build. Also because I had no idea what I actually wanted. But I eventually settled on pouring most of my points into hacking to complement my stealth playstyle. This also brings us to the scenarios you'll be put in. At first, you don't have much choice how you want to go about missions, but a bit later you can play them tailored to your style. In my case, I was all about stealth, hacking enemy turrets for my cause of course. There's even an upgrade so that you can hack enemy enhancements. But in certain missions, I also realized the limitations of my build, especially in the game's final mission. Without spoiling anything, putting a few points more into offense is definitely not a bad thing. Of course, being a Western RPG, that means inventory management. Not really my forte, I'll be honest. Just like with The Witcher 3, if you carry too much, you walk around at a snail's pace. You can sell items of course, dropping them is also an option, but preferably you'd want to dismantle them. Of course, being an open world game, you need cars to get you from point A to B. They take some getting used to, but I still prefer their handling to other open world games like GTA. Yeah, shoot me. Outside of the main story quest, there is still some stuff to do. You can spend your hard-earned cash, called eddies here, on weapons, clothes, or in the red light district if you know what I mean. Of course, there's side mission content, like helping enforce the law in certain areas. Boxing tournaments are also available. Honestly, they shouldn't be even worth mentioning here, as they're just tried and tested stuff other developers put into their games already. Fetch quests and the likes. However, what makes some of these really engaging is the writing, where some really interesting ideas and concepts are explored. So something which would just be a mundane task becomes quite interesting due to the writing. The companion side quests are the best when it comes to this, so make sure you play them and get to know the characters even better. Overall, in comparison to Grand Theft Auto or Ubisoft games, there isn't as much to do, but for me that's okay. I'm not a big fan of having tons of markers on the map anyway, but for some this can be a bit disappointing. The game at times can look really good, even on last gen. The game's aesthetic is something completely different than that from the fantasy-inspired Witcher series, but the devs did a really good job of bringing it to life. The art style also helps the game become its own and still look good on older hardware. City districts also feel very distinct from one another and therefore also have their own identity. For instance, Watson, where you start off, is a place for the masses, looking okay, nothing fancy, but also very diverse, being that it has many different people living there. Then you contrast that against something like Corporate Plaza, which is very clean, almost code-like, for the rich and big corporations. And then to contrast that even further, you have something like Pacifica, which is an abandoned resort that was in the making. Every location is therefore noticeably different. I played mostly on PS4 Pro, and that's where majority of the footage is from. On the PlayStation platforms, the streets can at times feel very empty, especially when you are driving in a vehicle. This is a bit better on the Xbox consoles, but none do it like the PC. In terms of performance, frame drops have been ironed out to a certain degree. You'll still encounter them in stress moments, on PS4 more so than on the Pro, but these last gen versions do a good job given how old the hardware is. But if you want the most consistent version to play on consoles, then it's playing with the enhanced backwards compatibility on PS5. 60 frames is achieved most of the time. The beginning of the game also does a very good job of funneling you through a mostly filtered version of Night City, so that you don't see the jank that comes afterwards as the world opens up a bit. Special mention is also needed for the PC exclusive ray tracing. From what I've seen on other people's footage, the game really lends itself well for these real-time reflections. However, I have to be honest that I ran the game without that setting. Lastly, the audio. The radio stations are just okay in my opinion. However, the background music during missions is really good, as well as the music that kicks in during combat. They all do well to feel futuristic and are fitting within the Cyberpunk universe. The other audio side are the performances. In short, top notch if you ask me. The only character lacking a bit is actually Johnny. Don't get me wrong, Keanu Reeves does an excellent job, but you can tell that he is an actor and not a voice actor. Some lines sometimes feel like they were not conveyed with the right intentions, as if he couldn't fully imagine the scenarios he was to be put in. Anyway, it's not as bad as I make it sound, and honestly a very minor gripe. It's just that the other characters knock it out of the park in terms of their performances. Overall, Cyberpunk 2077 is definitely playable. Is it now the masterpiece that so many got onto the hype train for? No, and I certainly don't think waiting for the native PS5 and Xbox Series X versions will change that. However, what is on offer is decent, and even very playable on the last gen consoles now. In addition, I also recommend watching GameSpot's videos around the world of Cyberpunk and Night City to get even more immersed into 2077. They cover all the major events leading up to the game, since the Cyberpunk universe is quite vast. As of this review, there should also be a major update coming early next year. Of course, I'll make an update video on that as well, maybe even the native PS5 and Series X versions, but first I gotta get my own PS5. And with that, also hopefully the next gen versions of Witcher 3 as well. So that brings us to the end of the video. Thanks for watching it till to the end. You know the drill. If you liked the video, leave a like and consider subscribing to get my latest reviews and other gaming related content. This is your boy Jehuty, and I'll see you on the next I Just Played review.
Know who they are, who the woman is? Any idea how we find them?
Fuck, V. I've been dead the last half-century. Sorry if I'm unable to hand you all the answers on a chrome fucking platter when you snap your fingers.